Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Meaningful Communication Show. I'm your host, Chad Eaves, and I am joined by our regular contributor, Michael Gansl, of Voice of Reason Consulting out of New York City. I'm in Chicago, and our guest today is from the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, and is Chris Larcade of Synergy Sales Advisory, also with CEO Advisor, and he is a fractional chief revenue officer. And the topic today is going to be sales. So, Michael, what do
Well,
we want to talk about with sales today?
actually, Chris and I had met a few months ago and have had some spirited conversations about sales, as well as you and I, Chad, have had the same type of conversations. So I thought it would be fun if the three of us would get together and basically talk about sales. So I wanted to rein in the subject a little bit because sales is so broad. So really today, how about we give about 30 minutes of time to what makes a bad, a good, or a great salesperson. So, Chris, since you're our guest, we'll put you on the hot seat. What do you think?
Oh, what makes a bad?
Well, start with bad. Start with bad. What makes a salesperson bad?
Someone who's simply looking to sell the product and not serve the customer.
Okay.
I think I know previously sales was focused on, I need to sell this to whomever, the fuller brush person knocking on doors, sell, sell, sell. And that today makes for a bad salesperson. You have to understand the customer before you move forward.
Okay. Chad, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've all seen the stereotypical salesperson, the quota driven, make the sale. When do you think that transition happened, Chris, where it went more from just focusing on that number, focusing on capturing that sale, to being more the servant, the service, the customer service, and maybe focusing more on a longer term relationship than just that one hit and run?
I'm not sure it has really changed overall holistically in the environment. I still think 80% of the people are doing it just sell, 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 where the other 20%, that's where I really look to focus is with that 20% who realize that sales is not just marketing, sales, and customer service or customer experience. It's really about holistically the entire journey. Very few people still realize that. I think the pivot began where that 10, 15, 20% that I look to engage with started to trend when we started to track the data better. However, data is a dangerous spiral because if you're not looking at it correctly, you're just data driven versus looking at the entire holistic process within the company, you're stuck right back at sales 101 with this number equals that number, so I need to do this. And it's not just about what the sales team is doing or not doing.
So I want to take it back. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I want to take it back. See, I think what makes a bad salesperson is, well, let me put it this way. I would think that the great majority of people in sales are what I call the accidental salesperson. They just kind of fall into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they fall into it. And it's not something that they really wanted to make a choice, but they fell into it. And when you fall into something and you don't make the choice, you do a haphazard job.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the difference. A bad salesperson is a salesperson who has not made a choice to be a salesperson. When they decide that here they are and they make the choice to be a salesperson, then they will no longer be a bad salesperson. They will have the opportunity to become a good one and possibly a great one. I think it has a great deal to do with making that choice. That's why I think most people, and I would say this, you said the 80-20?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my thought is that 80% of the salespeople out there are really either bad or just okay. And it's because they really haven't made the choice. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it.
Well, let me challenge you on it if that's okay.
What else is new, Chris?
Oh yeah, right. So if they've made that choice, okay, I'm going to be a salesperson. do they just then focus on being a salesperson, or do they what does that mean? What does that mean for you,
Well,
Michael? I'm going to be a good when you became a good salesperson. What was that transition? What was that moment? Just I'm going to be into sales and I'm going to really give this my all, because sales is a draining job. It really can.
yes, no, it definitely is a draining job, but you basically make the choice. Say, I want to be. I recognize that I'm in sales and I want to be good at it. How do I become good at it? Some of the things you said previously. You become good at it by deciding that it's a long game.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a long game, then you have to basically come to grips with the transactional side of sales, because sales is transactional. There's no getting away from it, but it can also be the long game. The long game is a question of how can I satisfy the needs of my client? How can I help them solve their problem? How can I basically be, in essence, an advisor, a consultant, in addition to whatever they are doing, so I can help them grow their business? That's a journey. That's the journey of sales enablement. That's where the salesperson has the opportunity to move along and move from being just an okay kind of salesperson to a better one, even good, and then possibly even great. So that's really what I would say. You have to make the choice. And so many people, look, we make choices. Like, you went to college, you said, I want to be this. I'd ask you, Chris, quite frankly, did you go to college to become a sales trainer, a sales advisor, a salesperson?
I think I was in school.
Yes.
When I pivoted halfway through, I realized I was going to get into sales, right? You know my background a little bit. So I did, but I also looked at it at that time to what I was saying. I was, as you know, I was in media sales, and it was, I'm going to sell my bag of 30-second spots to this person. And I don't care if they need to buy, if they really should be in the Wild Wild West special. That's what I'm going to sell them. So it was a conscious effort. But I think one thing that's in that process is, once you want, and this is what's changing today, it's not just being about, in my opinion, just being a good salesperson. That's the 80%. It's to get to that 20% who realize that they're a salesperson within an entire holistic environment. Because more often than not, sales, I'm just going to go sales, 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 sales. And really, to get companies moving forward in a modern sales environment, there really needs to be an emphasis within the sales group that they are part of an organization. And I look back at when I was in media. I could sell 1,000 commercials, but if the person switching air made a mistake, it didn't matter what I did. And there is that slight approach and change to business these days, where that the really elite 20% realize that sales is part of the entire process, not just the leading edge of the spear, if you will.
Yes, but look, I think probably one of the most difficult jobs in the world is being a salesperson. And I'll tell you why. You're always walking a tightrope. On one side are numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, salespeople are measured by their numbers and not measured by their personality, their good looks, or how friendly they are.
Right.
Ultimately, they're measured by the numbers. Well, if you're measured by the numbers, there's a tremendous pressure to deliver on the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if, as we say, the salesperson who moves along that sales enablement journey basically has to understand the process side, the fact that it's not just a transaction, that it is, goes beyond that, and that you are serving the needs of the client and so on and so forth, who may or may not need your product, your service, the transaction. You're walking that tightrope. And when you walk that tightrope, it's like in life, it's hard to have just a number put on your forehead and said, this is the number, because we're not numbers, but this is how you're measured, by the number. So it's why it's such a tightrope, because it's a very difficult job.
And I agree with you. I agree with 100%. But let me ask you this: do you feel that not enough sales is a sales team problem? How would you define that? Not enough sales. We have a good product. the customer understands the product within reason, right? But we're not selling it. We're sitting at number 3, or the client is sitting number 3 or 4 in the process. They keep on doing the same thing, different goals, different strategies, 3-year plan, 7-year strat plan, X, Y, or Z pricing strategies, value pricing. At the end of the day, is not enough sales a sales problem only? In your opinion, Chad or Michael?
It's a great question, and I'm thinking about it. Chad, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a large factor of it. Is it the only factor? I think that would be oversimplifying it, because we're excluding what the market conditions are, what the competition is like, state of the art, and other factors. So, how well does a sales team perform is definitely, important, and it bears on the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also the context of what is that sales team performing in. They could have the great product, but if it's a generation or 2 generations old, is it still going to compete? And also, I come from a software background.
Sure.
Before I moved into doing communications professional training. And one of the things I saw repeatedly, especially when I moved into being a consultant, was the disconnect between sales and your line of business teams, your software development teams, and stuff like that. And almost to where there was definitely, there could be definitely rather intense feelings on how they got along. One team, we make it, you sell it. Nobody feels like the other team gets the credit they deserve, or the comp, or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And, those can impact, I think how a sales team does as well. Is, you talk about that being a part of the organization. How well is that organically, achieved, versus they're out there running Lone Ranger, doing their own thing without, support and wanting to belong, to the team. Because I've run across a lot of salespeople, and like they may be products of their environment and in the industry, where they want nothing to do with the rest of the organization. They want to do their thing and not even necessarily be on a team. They just want to be there, make their numbers. And I think part of that's leadership,
Mm-hmm.
culture, expectations. That would be some of my observations, looking from the Fortune 100 and government sales that I've been involved with from the technical side.
I think I appreciate that. I'd like to touch on maybe just one or two things from my point of view. And Michael, please. The rogue seller, to me, that's a rogue seller who goes out there and just wants to do their thing. I was a rogue seller, hand raised. I was incredibly hard to manage, but I learned over time, going back to that person switching air, that I was part of a team, right? So sometimes those numbers that are put on the forehead are so high because there are efficiency in the process. In the fractional CRO role, I look at the sales teams, but I also look holistically at the entire organization. Where are those inefficiencies? Where's that communication? Maybe we need to motivate maybe receivables in a different way, maybe payables in a different way. How do we incentivize those groups to really be part of the organization as a whole? Because if we keep on putting numbers on foreheads and saying you need to be +5, that's the 80%. Right. That's going to result in how we're moving forward. I think it's the more we continue to integrate sales within the organization and work to maximize those efficiencies is how we actually also help to drive revenue. Because there could be low-hanging revenue growth, but by just changing a couple of different processes. When I come in in that fractional CRO role, sometimes it's disruptive. I am a big believer that just because something's been going on a certain way for the past 10 years doesn't inherently make it right. In fact, systematically, there could be a bunch of things that are wrong. But that's my spin on that. Michael.
And expanding on that, one of the other things I would like to get your perspective on is the attitude that really everybody is a salesperson, or everybody should have some role in that, versus it being heavily siloed. What's your take on that, and like what's the upside of that or downside of that?
From my point of view, everyone is in sales for the company throughout. What those roles maybe change percentage-wise, I almost look at it as a series of gates and checks, right? If your gates and are opening and closing correctly, almost like a heart valve, the system's working correctly. So we want to have everyone incentivized to work correctly. It's when the smallest gate, maybe it is in receivables, maybe it's in shipping. I don't want to diminish those roles, but sometimes from sales, those become smaller roles. But is that gate stuck? Is there an issue where it's not opening and closing at the right point? I think that is really where a lot of it breaks down. And the other part really, that's probably 60, 70%. Another 20, 15% is there's a failure to motivate for innovation across the company. Right? You look, it's not just product. How are we innovative on marketing, and how are we innovative on sales? That really changes things to a great extent.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but I want to bring it back to the salesperson. And quite frankly, you're right. Everyone in a company is a salesperson. The person who answers the phone, the person who's in the AR, the person who's in shipping. Everyone is in sales because everyone realizes that they only exist for their client. And not to say that the client is always right. But you disappeared. You're back. Come on back, Chris. Little technical.
Sorry about that, guys. I have no idea what happened. I lost video. I think you can edit that through. I apologize for that.
We see you. We see you.
Good.
So we always have some technical difficulties. I'm even getting some feedback right now. Okay. All right. Well, anyway.
Live performance.
Right. So what I was saying, and I actually lost the point. That's okay. It takes an enlightened organization to realize that everybody in the organization is part of selling. Of course, the sales team is the edge of the spear, plain and simple, and they are. And for them to be effective, yes, you need an organization behind them. You need also to grow in an organization. The organization has to appreciate the fact that the sales process is always changing. What worked for you at one point in time to get to X million of dollars in sales, and having constructed your sales team and your organization in one way, isn't necessarily going to work if you want to get to 20 or 25 million. You have to realize that. Mm-hmm. But I want to bring the subject back to the salesperson. And there's an important point that I really want to make. Earlier in the conversation, I said that most salespeople are accidental salespeople, and most of them are not very good because they haven't really made the choice, meaning they haven't, they fall into it, and now they have a moment. Is this something I want to do or something I don't want to do? I have to make a paycheck. I have to pay my bills, and so on and so forth. So obviously, you become the salesperson because that's how we do it. But you have to make the choice. And here's what I think separates a good salesperson from a great salesperson. It's a recognition that sales is both a science and an art, and it requires a salesperson to educate themselves and not to be dependent on the organization to train them. Of course, the dependence on the organization to train is in the product and the service and so on and so forth, and indeed the sales itself. But I know when I find a great salesperson, it's because they have become a student of the art and the science of selling. I ask them, what have you read? What is your approach? What is your philosophy? What do you think? And if they can't give me those answers, I know they're not great. They're not going to be great. So that's really what accidental salesperson, make the choice and then become a student of selling. To me, that begins to get somebody from bad to good to great.
Michael, I do agree strongly that education is part of it. It's what differentiated me early on in my career, just because I simply read trade mags and simply became more engaged. Knowledge is incredibly powerful, and it's beholden on the individual to push it forward. I also think structurally it's beholden on the organization to make sure that everyone is learning and focused in the right direction, because it's about knowledge of the product, it's about knowledge of the company, and just as important is really knowledge of the customer's journey and the customer experience, however that may be. Sometimes I do think that's where the great salespeople make themselves extraordinary salespeople, is they understand the buyer journey more so than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So one question I have, and I've seen this also in the project management side of the world, where it's a multi-billion-dollar industry for training in the industry. You still see failure rates 60, 66%, around about that across industries. And in sales, how we're talking about the 80% are okay to not so okay, then the 20% are good. Where do you, how would you advise someone to make that transition from being okay to being good, when, if you look at the statistics overall, the conversion isn't that good a percentage? Is it that, some training, not all training is equal? Is it how it's applied? Is you know it's so heavily weighted on the personal, on that person, that how they get training is not as important? Or how would someone pick and try to make that transition from being okay to great?
Great question. Chris, let you take a crack at it.
Oh, thank you. I was going to throw to you, Michael.
Just caught it.
Well, thank you. The training, engaging with people such as Michael and I are great practices, and yourself, Chad. It all doesn't matter if it's not maintained, sustained, and ongoing. When I get into training myself with groups, it's not just let's do 3 days, because if you do 3 days of training, we all know what happened. The binder's sitting on the counter for the next year behind you. It gets dusty and it's thrown out in this next spring purge. It has to be ongoing, and it has to be sustained. It also has to be positioned as something positive and not something negative. Everyone from sales, excuse me, everyone rolls the eyes at the role play. That's because role plays are torturous, because 90%, 80% of the time they're done wrong. Role plays should be educational and move the ball forward, not demonstrative and negative. So to move them forward, training absolutely positively, you have to. As Michael said, accidental salespeople, again, hand raised. I was one of them initially, but I leaned into the training. I had a good group that really made sure the training was sustained. If you're going to train people to be great, you can't expect it to be a 3-week, 6-week course. It is a forever journey throughout the process, and you need to have a good sales leader in place to make sure that's accomplished.
I think that's well said. I think it's a journey. Look, I have books here on my table. I have the Challenger sale. Okay, we've all heard that. We've had spin selling. We've all heard that. There's Sandler selling. You can't teach a kid to ride a bicycle at a seminar. All of this, depends on, and I got a dozen more books, behind me and to the left of me, and there are many different styles of selling. But I think, Chris, you've got it correctly. It's recognizing that it's an ongoing journey, and more than that, it's not the responsibility of the organization to train you completely.
Mm-hmm.
It is your responsibility as a salesperson to find the training. Whether if your organization, your company doesn't give it to you, well, then you buy a book, or you basically invest in yourself. One time I was selling a training class, and I would ask someone, I said, well, over the last year, how much did you invest in yourself? And he'd say, well, I bought a book. Now, I was selling a $2,000 training class, Now, if you just bought a book for $25, and I would look and I'd say, well, you're a salesperson. Do you really think that was enough to make an investment in your being in sales? And so the answer is, I think, like you said, it's a life journey. And one year it's spin selling. Okay, and then maybe 3 years later it's the Challenger sales, and maybe then it's sales enablement. I mean, things keep changing, and it's just that kind of journey. So, I think that's really what makes people different, in my opinion.
I'd like to tag on to something you said, especially for a newer seller out there. I would say if you enter into a company and they're not offering any sort of sales training, ongoing company-wide training, because again, from my point of view, it's holistic. It shouldn't just be sales. There should be growth across the company. If you're into that sort of company and you want to be a strong seller, I suggest then finding another company that does offer training and really invest time in people to push it forward. Great place to cut your teeth. I did cold calling for a pool company in Buffalo. No training, but I learned a lot. But if you really want to lean into sales and you really want to grow forward, I would suggest looking for a company that really invests in the entire staff and also in that ongoing sales training. Because eventually you'll get to a point where you'll spin your wheels, because there are nuances and processes that you can come across and read, but you're going to miss things unless you're really educated along the process. We could all have business skills, but being an MBA takes something else.
Okay. So tell me what you meant when you said being an MBA is something else. What did you mean when you said that?
Well, we can all walk in. We all. I first of all, let me be clear. I am not an MBA individual, but there's a level of education. We have individual business skills, but being trained with an MBA or a JD or a PhD is a different skill set. Walking into just sales and reading a couple of books along the way, though fantastic, I believe a good seller should be motivated and pushed forward by the company and educated by the company, because it's not just a matter of reading books. There's a matter of practical implementation as well as mentoring that you just can't get from text.
Well, as I think I'm the only MBA on the call on the meeting here, I think there's definitely a differentiation in what that education and training does. Mm-hmm. And that's actually gets into kind of one of my pet peeves, because you get some programs that are heavily sales focused or even entrepreneur focused. And I think there's definitely limitations to how well that can be trained or transferred in that kind of environment for certain things like economics or management skills, different types of financial stuff. It's a great place to learn for some of those. But I think there's like you said, it's always learning from the process. And that's true in everything we do. My undergrad's in engineering. I still had a whole lot to learn once I got into industry. MBA, there's, it's the primer. It's that, it's that kind of jumpstart type situation. And, for sales, I think that's definitely, the case as well. And, one question I have for you, Chris, is in your role as a CRO or as an advisor, when can businesses be more proactive? Because I know from my perspective, when I coach people in communications, a lot of times, over half the time, I get the call when someone's in trouble. Yeah. They've stepped in it, or, they need some kind of guidance or improvement. Is that a similar type approach for what you do? And if it is, what would you advise leaders of companies to seek out that kind of assistance that you would offer before they find themselves in trouble?
It's a great question. Look, as we engage with our clients, clearly there are pain points, right? They are generally at some sort of stumbling or crisis or pain point. For me, I look at it, they typically are sitting 3, 4 in terms of market leadership, however we're going to define that, let's just say market leader, and they can't get to 2 or 1. If you do that a couple of times and you're doing everything the same, well, that there is the example of, if you're doing the same thing expecting a different result, that's the definition of insanity. So if you continue to do the same thing and you're sitting at 3 or 4, don't continue to sit at 2, 3, or 4, because eventually your 2, 3, or 4 is going to become 3, 4, or 6, or 7, 8, or 9, and then it gets worse. So if you're sitting there and you really can't figure out how I move this ball forward, that's the point to really look at it from my point of view, from a CRO point of view. What's going wrong in your process? What is missing? What gate is not opening or closing correctly? And how are you not motivating the team correctly? Over the team, not just being sales, the team being the organization.
What are you thinking, Michael?
I hear it. It's really, selling is an incredible challenge, and there's many moving parts in it, and I think we've been talking about that. I'm kind of just trying to see. Yes, I know what I wanted to mention. Look, we all talk about things changing, and we're on that journey. But I get a kick out of this book, which I can't really tell much by it. My orange Bible here, my 1957 Art of Selling by Elmer Letterman. And you know what? There we go. And what's fascinating is, indeed, the title is The New Art of Selling. And that was 1957.
Mm-hmm.
And he says the same things about what the new salesperson has to be. He has to understand the client. He has to understand that he has to solve problems. He has to understand that he has to be technologically astute, and all of that. So, whether you're a Sandler sales disciple or a Challenger sales or a spin selling, the reality is that it is an art, it is a science, and it behooves us to be definitive and proactive and make the choice. Want to be a good salesperson? Make the choice. Educate yourself and then learn. It's not just education, it's learning. It's actually implementing. It's doing. It's taking the risk. It's basically walking the tightrope. It's accepting that, sometimes you are going to be judged by that number, no matter what you think of yourself. And, and also you can fail. Have to accept the fact that you will be rejected. Not everybody's going to love you. Maybe your mother, maybe your father, maybe your brother says, no, I don't want to get too family about it, because you never know about families. But but the reality is that, it's a very tough but rewarding. So you're going to make a lot of money. And I think that's why salespeople basically are paid more, because they are taking greater risks. They are out there on the edge, on the tightrope, being rejected, so on and so forth, being judged. That's why their risk is greater. And we know what the adage is: greater the risk, hopefully the greater the reward. So I think we've come to the end of our time.
We've hit the 30-minute mark. Chris, do you have any closing comments or anything you'd like to share before we wrap up here?
No, I appreciate the time. This has been great talking with both of you. I think we violently agree across the board in a lot of areas. We're just saying it somewhat different ways. From my approach, I agree with what Michael is saying, 100%. Education, education, education. And throughout that process, for both the sales team, the business team, whatever, ops, wherever it may be, educate and also develop a culture that's not afraid to innovate, whether it be a sales structure or the company as a whole, because that's how you move it forward. That's how you differentiate yourself. But it's been great. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say thank you for joining us, Chris, and Michael, as always. And this will be available as a podcast and a video. And thank you all very much. And we will be back for our next episode in the next month or so. Have a good day.
Great. But before we end,
yes,
Chris, how do we reach you?
How do you reach me? Well, the best place, thank you, Michael. The best place to go would be to go to synergysalesadvisory.com. You can schedule an appointment there and learn a bit more about my practice. And we can take it from there. But again, that's synergysalesadvisory.com. Let's start there. And if we can start a conversation from that point, and someone can learn a bit more about my practice and how I approach the engagements overall. But again, I appreciate you asking for that, Michael.
Great. And
great point, Michael. And that'll also be in the show notes, so you could find that link there as well.
Well, I look forward to our one-on-ones, Chris, coming up next month or so. Chad, thank you as always. I hope our audience finds this as stimulating as we have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and everybody, take care.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.